Welcome to Let's Talk Democracy, the show where we have meaningful conversations on democracy. I'm your host, Tina Johnson. And each week, we're joined by people who are doing the hard work of building healthy democratic environments. With insightful guests, expert advice, and thought-provoking conversations, we dive deep into the heart of democracy. Whether you're here to learn or to get inspired, we've got something for you. Let's jump in and explore today's episode. Photojournalism is an incredible witness to the world, and in times of democratic unrest and political upheaval, the camera becomes more than a tool. It becomes a voice. And I've been reflecting lately on the role of the photographer, the stories they choose to tell, and the lens through which we come to understand truth, resistance, and power. At a moment when disinformation spreads rapidly and official narratives often obscure the truth, photojournalism serves as a visual counterbalance, preserving the people's stories and frames that cannot easily be erased. Today, I'm in conversation with Daniel Ephraim, a New York-based photojournalist, activist, and Grammy-winning producer whose work spans decades and whose eye has consistently turned towards justice, humanity, and cultural memory. In an era when misinformation is weaponized and public trust is under threat, we explore the vital role of visual storytelling and how photojournalism stands not just as a documentation, but as a force for democracy itself than ever. So let's get into it. Hi, Daniel. Thank you for joining me today on Let's Talk Democracy. I'm really excited to have you here as my guest.
Happy to be here.
I've been following the work you've been doing as a photojournalist out in the streets and documenting the protest and the engagement during Trump 1.0. And now we're in Trump 2.0, and things have gotten a lot more intense, I'll say, in a different way than it was. And I started thinking about the role of photojournalism in capturing the moments that many of us see of people in the street. And I thought, who could I talk to? And I thought, I could talk to Daniel because this is what you do. And what I wanted to ask, what's the role of photojournalism in strengthening democracy?
Well, I think that the role of the photojournalist is to tell stories and to try and convey, in my opinion, as much humanity as possible. And so that there's hopefully, without contributing to the narrative myself, besides documenting it, I hope that the story comes out truthfully. And that's really the role of holding people accountable for their actions, for their statements, holding our government accountable, no matter what party you're in, no matter where you stand on the political horizon. Like, what are you saying to the people, and how is it affecting us? And those are the types of things I look for, is to try and tell the story as truthfully as possible. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to start trying to do more documentary photojournalism work, was to really capture people's feelings about what was going on, and also how people were responding to what the government was throwing at us.
Yeah, I think the image connects people in a different way than the narrative journalism. When you can see someone's face and you can see the emotion that is part of the visual observation of photojournalism, it connects us in a way that either makes us engage, enrages us, or makes us think. And I think that's one of the powerful aspects of photojournalism that I really do respect. And just over the weekend, we've seen lots of images of what's coming out of LA with protesters out in the streets protesting the ICE agents who are going through and raiding many of the communities in LA. And it just strikes me again as an opportunity to, without the sound on, but seeing the images of people protesting first, peacefully protesting in the beginning, and then being engaged in a way that escalated it to what we're currently seeing as a violent backlash. And I know that you're in New York, not in LA, but seeing that unfold, I'm just curious, just the imagery of that for you, if you had thoughts on that, because it's just such a new, it's new, it just happened. So
Well, there are that same type of scenario, though not necessarily as large as that scenario over the weekend, happened in New York on Friday as well. Basically, a group of protesters of the kidnappings by ICE, went down to one of the immigration courthouses and decided to try to stop one of the deportation kidnapping vans from leaving the courthouse. And they did. And it's not reported on any mainstream news at all, but independent photojournalists covered it, and we can see what happened. And we can see that the people are taking their community seriously, and we're able to document that. And I see that in LA, and I see that here in New York, and I've seen that from other photojournalists around the country where this is happening. This is what our role is to try and make sure that we're telling the stories that aren't being told. I think one of the big problems that we have in the world is that the the media has been compromised. It's difficult to know who's telling you what and what the truth is, and whether you are on the right or on the left. I think you're probably concerned about this. I think this is a universal question. Like, who are you listening to? On the left, it would be, the question of Fox News, and I
I
certainly
think you mean on the right.
on the right, they have. I think that the problem is that the Western media, Washington Post, New York Times, have done terrible things and continue to do terrible things in their reporting. And it's in regards to Palestine specifically, they constantly take the mantle of the verbiage of propagandist Israeli Hasbara. They constantly do that. Even with the flotilla. The headlines from the Washington Post that I was just reading was just absurd how they're framing it. Also, Washington Post framed Trump's National Guard initiative in California as a like new staking new territory or something to that effect. This is about confidence in the media, and the confidence in the media is shaken to its core by people on the left and on the right, and I think that's a real problem.
Well, I think one of the things that contributes to this shaky ground, the shaky relationship to the media is one, people, we don't get our media in the traditional ways that we did before. We have other resources and outlets to be able to get that information. So even if it's the New York Times or the Washington Post, more standard or traditional media sources, most of the time people were getting their media from people who think alike or listening to the same kind of online platforms and deliverers of news, and maybe not the traditional folks. And then the same for people on the left. So there is this insulated environment, right? Everyone's living in a bubble where even if there was more information coming from the traditional media, you still, if you're not engaged in that and you're engaged in another insulated space, you're only going to get that story that resonates with your value system. And so I think that it's a failure on on the current state of the media environment, to understand the need for having unbiased, clear reporting that isn't meant for clicks or likes or shares. And then that's feeding the way in which people consume media. And so I agree with you, and I am saying, and this, that this contributes to not having these stories that are necessary to be elevated. I think Democracy Now! Is one of the few spaces that I've seen where you can get some reporting on this effort by the people to engage in pushing back against this current administration and trying to present the information in a way that people can understand the complexity of the issue from the perspective of the human and not necessarily the perspective of politics. So I'm not saying they do a great job. I'm not saying they do a bad job. I'm just saying that they tend to do reporting that reflects more of sharing information than it is telling you the information. And so, as a photojournalist in the space that you're in, or especially around protest space, and you spoke about this some, but I'd like to dig into this a bit more. What is the role, your role as an independent photojournalist who goes out there and does engage in the community, does engage in these spaces? You're in spaces where people are putting their physical bodies on the line peacefully, and sometimes, as we see in LA. And I did see footage from the courthouse in New York where people are physically getting engaged to resist. How do you see your role in capturing these moments to tell this story, to create that narrative?
It's simple, really. I'm just there. I'm just trying to see where, where the moments lead, and how in my head, I guess I'm doing some type of abstract calculation as to how all the images that I'm capturing in the moment may or may not play out when I'm complete for for that event. As a not necessarily a protest, but it's fresh in my mind. I covered a couple of different instances, or rather events, on Friday for the New York City mayoral race, with the candidate Zoran Mamdani. And he first had a press conference outside of the New York Real Estate Association, which just pledged $3 million more to the former governor Cuomo for his campaign. And Mamdani just decided to make an issue of that, which I think is perfectly legit, discussing who's beholden to who. And so he brought some renters out in front of the New York Renters Association building, and started a press conference. At that press conference, it immediately turned to chaos as a MAGA fan and disruptor came in and started really physically pushing and shoving, bullying, screaming over the whole press conference, which I don't think is in its own right is illegal in terms of just disruptions. It's free speech, and Zoran's campaign was involved with free speech by having a press conference out front, and this disruptor decided to do disruption. But the disruptor took it one and two and three steps further by spewing anti-Muslim hate speech, by forcibly pushing people, and eventually biting a volunteer who was trying to prevent further violence at the dis- at from this disruption. This MAGA person bit a volunteer and was subsequently arrested. My thought on it was, okay, I'm going to a Friday morning press conference with a serious mayoral candidate who I've covered a bit. So I'm continuing with my storyline of, okay, I've covered him a few times, and I have a longer relationship in photography back a couple years coverage. So I'm continuing this. It's ongoing. And then it's also specific to this moment. Like, oh, it's the race for mayor and he's like, the contender right now. That's the story as well. And then it became like, oh, this volunteer was attacked by this MAGA nut job. And it was I shouldn't say nut job, I apologize. It I don't know his mental state. I shouldn't make such judgments like that when discussing it. But the point being is that he was definitely unhinged. I can use that word, and it was somewhat scary. Obviously, after and as the person was involved with this, there were several confrontations where it almost came to fisticuffs. People were being pushed in the middle of the street. It was a big disruption, and then to moving forward, the second event. So that's one event that totally went sideways in terms of what I expected it to be. Um, and then the next event was later on in the day. I met up again, and there was a meeting at a church with it was a conversation with Zoran was holding a conversation with former gubernatorial candidate and constitutional lawyer Zephyr Teachout, as well as former FTC um, leader Lena Khan, and they were discussing the economics of business in New York City at a church with an audience. And again, like pretty, pretty, seems like a pretty basic, overall, like here's what we're gonna do. And I couldn't imagine it was gonna deviate too far from that. But one of the things that's become like the issue of the New York City mayoral race, as undoubtedly your listeners and you know or have heard, uh, is this the idea of where do you stand on Palestine, Israel? Where do you stand on this? And so immediately Zoran gives an introduction, and immediately a protester interrupts. Free Palestine protester interrupts, and has some serious thoughts about what's going on. It has nothing to do with the theme of that event specifically. It has nothing really to do with economics, though it has everything to do with the economics, obviously. But, this person was upset, perfectly legitimately so, complaining that she has friends and family who have perished, have been executed, killed because of genocided. And there was I don't know that there was anyone in the room that was unempathetic to that or sympathetic to that that idea, and even bringing that up. And I thought the candidate did a really good job of just letting the person speak and being humble and letting her tell her story and listening. And during a time where it really wasn't allocated for this, I thought he was actually doing a pretty good job of trying to appease what was going on and recognize it, and also eventually tried to move it on. The person did leave the audience. Security did force that person to leave. But anyway, the point being, and several other people spoke up like this, one after the other. And I think that these scenarios need to be. I went there because I just to focus a little bit more on what I'm trying to describe here. I went there, because I thought, oh, it'd be interesting to hear what these two um, monopoly killers, which I think is an important role to have right now, had to say about some of Zoran's plans and how things could be implemented policy wise. So I thought that's what we were going to, be discussing, and they did just get to discuss that a little bit, but really it revolved around his uh, ability, and some would say otherwise, inability to communicate his feelings on how to navigate the Palestine issue. I thought was a really interesting thing, and I don't know whether I was able to document that well enough as I was looking at it from a still perspective for the event. I didn't really have the opportunity to get much video, so I'm not sure I could really tell that story besides adding my own description to it, which is what I'll have to do with words when I post about it. So I don't really know if I'm answering your question, but I guess my overall summation to this segment is that, you go with one intention in mind and you don't know what's going to happen. Sometimes it's boring and it happens exactly as you expect it to happen. And sometimes it just goes right off the rails. And I think that we have to be able to go with the flow and tell and figure out how the story changes as it's happening. And that's a difficult thing to do.
What is the story of democracy in these moments?
I think the democracy is that those people were able to get their thoughts out and that it was handled in a way where they may not have felt heard, but they were heard. They were definitely heard. And they might not have felt heard because they're in trauma, as many are. And, you know, no one's blaming them for that either. I think protest is often delicate and usually, and then when it's delicate, it's not really protest. It's like, I don't know. It is protest, but I don't know whether it's effective protest, I guess. And I think that over the course of the last few years, whether last decade, 2 decades of activism on my part or witnessing activism, holding power accountable, whether you're on the Democratic side or you're on the Republican side or some other side, like that is important. And there are different ways to to get the success of what you're trying to get across. I think that people are getting a little better at understanding how to obtain success when it comes to democratic protest. I don't think that ultimately my opinion is that I don't believe that leadership cares whether or not protests are peaceful or not. If they're peaceful, then it's good for them. In terms of the power brokers, they're happy with peaceful protest, and they're also happy with uh, you know, protest that turns violent. They're happy with both. It works either way works for them.
In what way do you think it works for them and both of those scenarios?
Well, retaining power or justifying power. I mean, if it's peaceful protest, then they know what's going to happen, and you know nothing deviates from that because you've consulted with potentially with police, and therefore, nothing kind of goes outside the guardrails of what the police expect. So they're happy because they don't have to put more men, women, etc. on to the job of being at the protest because you followed the guidelines of what you've discussed with the police. And therefore, traffic isn't disrupted, you know? And then, so that's good for them. It also means that if there's nothing out of the ordinary, that it probably won't make the news. So that also is good for power brokers. No, if there's no controversy, then the news doesn't cover it. So that also is helpful to the power brokers. And then if it turns the other way and it becomes um, more contested physically or otherwise, it doesn't go according to plan, or it's not approved by the power brokers that be the police, etc., then the police don't like it because it disrupts their day and they have to put more manpower on it. They don't know where you're going. But by the same token, by not going that direction, by not planning with the police, then you're likely to get some contention, which very well may be covered by the news. And therefore, the actual sentiment that you're trying to get across, whatever the political motivation is likely to be covered, or more likely to be covered.
Yeah, but I mean, if it's covered, and you're right, it's more likely to be covered, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to change anything. So if in the moment you're in the news cycle, people are aware of it. After a few days, it dies down or it settles down. Um, and then people move on to the next thing that arises. If it's a storm, if it's a child that's been kidnapped, suddenly it shifts. So you hold the attention of the media for a period of time with an extreme reaction or extreme outpouring of defiance, but it doesn't change necessarily the thing that you are in defiance of. I'm of two minds, right? Yes, protests are important. Yes, it's important for folks to put their voices out there, to push, to make as much of make a scene, for lack of a better word, as possible to get attention. And to your earlier point, traditional media doesn't cover this. Therefore, independent journalists, citizen journalists who put that out on social media become a resource and a tool to the community because more and more people get their information from these platforms, usurping the traditional media that might not want to raise or elevate those issues or those people. And then you have this thing of the next step beyond that has to be the change that you're looking for. So you protest, you're out there, and the people who benefit, the power brokers who benefit from this, and let's just put it to frame it for our conversation, politicians, they don't necessarily feel moved to do anything, especially if you're looking at it from a national level, right? But at a local level, a state level, if you're in New York, Florida, Pennsylvania, if you're looking at it from a state level and you're pushing back, there's much more probability that you're going to be able to have some effective change occur because these are people that you can vote for in your community. At the national level, it becomes this other beast, it becomes this other thing, because if you're protesting the government as a whole, you're not necessarily able to focus the fight. And so there's this tension. And I'm wondering how do people engage in protests that move them and move their causes forward in order to get to the change that they're in the streets sacrificing themselves for?
Well, I mean, any one protest, isolated one protest, is not likely to do much. It's about this consistency, as we've seen. So, consistent protest is what led to the change in Korea. Um, you know, that total shutdown of their of their economy, which is something that is discussed here in terms of a general strike that is being planned for, I guess, 28 here in the States. You know, that's what is really necessary to make sure national change occurs and grand change, because shutting down the economy, I mean, that's all we are here in this, and it's been easily shown that that's all we are, is a capitalist state. So, like, we have to shut down capitalism if there's a way to, like, and if we can do that, even disrupt capitalism short, even on a very basic level, then, and I say we in the sort of general sense of we, like the public, the people, if the public shuts down capitalism, then there's a chance at change. It's got to be sustained because it's got to have that impact. It's kind of the same impact that the boycott Tesla um, rallies somewhat affected, in the sense of, well, did they lower the stock price of Tesla? I don't think it's actually lower now. At one point, it was lower. It made Musk look so bad that it did force a change in how he's presenting his role. Whether or not it's actually changed or not is, again, a different type of game that they're playing up at the upper echelon of what billionaires and oligarchs do. But you know what I mean? Like, there was a change. They were forced to make at least a public appearing change that, okay, Musk is no longer in charge of this. Now, okay, is he not really? I mean, that's up to discussion, I think. But are they fighting right now? They seem to be, but are their policies really not that aligned anymore? I'd argue they're still pretty aligned. So this is all, a lot of this is shell gamesmanship. But I think that the consistency of the people to protest is what drives change. And though one protest, it may not change the world, several protests in local context that are really like well attended and potentially not sanctioned, that does change things. The politicians do get nervous when they find out that their constituents are like putting their bodies on the line and sitting down in the streets, and they hear it from all sides on this. So I think it does have an impact, but I think that the impact is about the idea of protest being a one-off, I think is a losing proposition. People have been disengaged in our country, I think, for a long time, for the most part. And when I say disengaged, it doesn't mean that people don't have opinions. Everyone's got an opinion, but the opinions are not translating into building community and looking out for each other. It falls back into this bigger philosophy that we've been taught here, which is, you can pick yourself up by the bootstraps. That's what you should be doing versus what society could be doing and how we can help each other. And the bigger issue is taxes on the wealthy, perhaps, but the smaller issue is just making sure that your community knows that you have their back. I think one of the beautiful things about Los Angeles, from what I've seen and heard from different reports, there's some good stuff on Democracy Now! This morning, in fact, if your listeners are engaged with that program. There's an interview with one of the organizers of the ICE resistance in LA, and they're very organized, and they showed it. And I think that standing up for your communities as a whole, and that it's cross-cultural boundaries, pretty impressive. If a successful general strike is to happen, it would be because it's multicultural and, that the communities intertwine with each other.
And the
And
general strike in 2028 is being organized by the unions, or
well, the unions are the ones that are pushing that date specifically, because a lot of people are asking, well, why not next week? But a general strike, because of the scope of it is a lot grander than what most people are used to. And so, yes, the unions are pushing that, and they're pushing. Uh, the Sean Fain has spoken about it in a number of ways, from the UAW, and what he said is, paraphrasing poorly, that in essence there's a number of big UAW and other contracts that are coming in 28. And so, in essence, if you're going to galvanize the labor force to really work for a strike, it's probably to help improve their place, make sure that they're being taken care of. And if these contracts are up at the same time, then it provides larger population that has a real motivated interest in a successful general strike campaign.
the protest in South Korea pushing back against the head of state there declaring martial law, that was backed by the legislative body as well as the judiciary there. The civil rights movement is the historical moment for America, and I think for many countries around the world, where the sustained resistance by the communities in the South and then supported by many people from the North who went to be a part of it came to be because folks were organized, focused, and had direction. And you mentioned something just a few minutes ago. They were connected to community. And in that community, they were able to support each other's efforts for the long haul because they shared the same vision. They wanted the same outcome. Some of the groups wanted to get there from different means, but their goal was to create equal access under the law for everyone in the US, regardless of race. And I think the thing that is interesting right now is that there is a disconnect in the way in which people are organizing themselves to have a sustained fight. And part of it is that it's not necessarily multicultural. I will say that there's a disconnect in the way that people are engaging with their neighbors around how to support each other, to have this long-term focus towards winning these fights. Many people feel it's the action of capitalism that has created this horrible environment for many people across the country, I would say across the world. But I think that this issue of governance is very important because you have to change the power brokers in office who are willing to say the capitalist system that extracts from communities, that doesn't shore up their social safety net, do not have the people's best interests at heart. So that also needs to be a part of this work. And on June 14th, there is the No Kings protest that's supposed to be all across the country. There will be protests pushing back, one against Trump using the 250th anniversary of the U.S. military, this North Korean dictator's parade style where people come and salute him instead of being there, saluting their flag and working for their countries. And I'm wondering, in that moment, do you see this as a culminating opportunity for the sustained resistance, the building up of that power?
This is an opportunity for people to meet their community, and hopefully people that aren't in their community, and talk to them, and get out of their bubble a little bit. And I hope that happens. Um, do I think that it will have a positive impact? Yes, I believe it will, because every time we get together, there's the positive impact, and the horror stories of the headlines are reaching people. And I think that there's a lot of, especially with what happened over the weekend in LA. I just think there's a lot of people that are more center minded, and even on the right, that are just like, what's going on with this thing that we claim to cherish called the Constitution? Why is it being overlooked? Why is it being pushed aside here? I saw a person address a video of person addressing some of the National Guard over the weekend, just this morning, that was very moving. And, it was, the question of, you've sworn an oath to the Constitution, not to a person. Like, it's already starting. Like, not that this hasn't been said before, that, this is not about any one person. It's not about a king. It's not about oligarchs. It's been said for a few months now. It's been said before this. This is whether, and it's been said during Biden's run, and, his contributions to genocide in Israel. So no one's above this for me. Like, I don't have any love for the Democratic Party. I don't have any love for the Republican Party. I like to tell stories of people and class, and like making change, positive change for themselves. So I don't differentiate there in that regard. I follow policy. So I guess the long answer is that I do think this is a real opportunity for people to get to know their neighbors, and I hope they do, and I hope that it continues. And I don't think that they'll stop anytime soon. I think that this, with what's going on in national government governance right now, I think that, there's going to be thousands of protests on June 14th, and there'll be thousands of protests probably within 2 weeks, or a month after, that are probably equally as big. I mean, I don't think this is going away. I don't think Trump is suddenly going to just decide not to put the hammer down. We, the people, need to get better at working with each other so that sustained protests can work for everyone.
I think that June 14th is a moment and an opportunity, like you said, for folks who can and are available to get out in the streets and to protest and to lift their voices and tried to push the volume up so that it resonates. However, it's also very important that once the protests are over, the momentum continues to be built towards that change you want to see. And that only really happens if you're connected to your neighbors, if you are actually talking to each other, engaging in the social change at a very local level. I mean, all politics are local. Before they get to the national, they are local. And here's an opportunity I hope that people take advantage of, is that you're going to see people that you know out in the streets, hopefully. Or if they're not out in the street, that you're calling them and saying, hey, this is an opportunity for us to go out and support. I feel very strongly about the need for there to be a what next after these protests. I hope, it's always a hope I have, the People's Climate March, I was part of the process of getting that organized. And I asked in those meetings, what are we asking people to do? Once they leave these streets, what can they be asked to do in order to engage? And I think that that is something that if it's asked and people are given the opportunity, or opportunities are created for them to engage, they become their own news media. It's less about what you're seeing outward and it's more about what you're discussing inward, because you're in community with each other. You're sharing your stories, your hopes, your dreams, your fears. You're organizing around things that you care about or that you hope that your neighbors care about. You're learning why you may not agree on certain topics, but you're hearing their perspective, and there's a connection there. And that for me is the thing that I find, that protests oftentimes provide us a moment, but do not have the foundational framework for us to build strong community strength and pushing back and pushing up the choices that we want to see being made by people in power. And as a photojournalist who is out in the streets and you're seeing this and you're getting these images through your lens, where or do you know of any spaces where that kind of community connection is being made,
Oh,
or
absolutely.
or
Yeah.
how it can be made? Yeah.
No, I absolutely see it, all the time, and it's around the Free Palestine movement. So, um, there is tremendous amount of education, community, things, fun events, uh, all culture based, opportunities to meet up with people that you've met in the streets and get to have a better, more a deeper relationship with. Um, and I see that, you know, all the time. And I have it's the same thing with Black Lives BLM that happened in 2020 through 2022 type of range. There was just tremendous amounts of opportunity to meet up with different people that, you might not have otherwise come in contact with. I wasn't necessarily like I wasn't necessarily involved with mutual aid before 2019, 2020, but I had I had an understanding of what it was, but I didn't necessarily participate very often in myself and what or how I could help further than just donating some clothes or something like that. And I saw that during these larger protests. Again, sometimes it's in BLM's case where um, it felt a little more scary at times because, again, I thought the protest was done was done right. I mean, it was unsanctioned, unpermitted, and there were just such large masses of people that we kept each other safe, and they kept each other safe, and to sort of just walk in that community and be able to experience that, and then afterwards to know that there was the next day or 2 days after there might have been a food event that everyone was going to, um or a talk, at a poetry club that is going to introduce me to new people, new voices. That was like some of the most beautiful, touching um, times that I can recall in my life. And so I think that people need to be given the opportunity. They're getting the opportunity. Are they going to, you know, carpe diem? Are they going to seize the day? And when I say seize the day in this case, it's like it's really seize the days, seize the months, seize their lives back, and kind of look at it from a different angle. I think there's a chance because, again, when people see that what we're seeing, people being kidnapped just off the streets, families being destroyed, like in moments, things that will damage kids the rest of their lives. There's not a parent out there that doesn't understand that type of harm that's being done. And I'd like to think. And I think that these are powerful times, and they deserve a powerful response. And I think that people are also powerfully affected by this. And I think that people do want more and realize that this stupor that we've been lulled into as in a capitalist, imperialist, colonizing societies around the world, that like we've been lulled to sleep for profit. And will this one thing, one event on June 4th, will that change us? No, it's not going to change, but it might. For some people, it might actually have like radical changes for people, and radical is different for everyone. So that role of what is big change for people is going to be very deeply personal, but radical to one white grandmother is going to be very different than what's radical to an undocumented Latino. It's very, very different. So, but recognizing that all of it, if there's some push, I think that's hugely important.
Yeah, the idea around sustained resistance in the days, months, weeks, years leading up to what that transition looks like is the big question for a lot of people, because some people do have the capacity. There are some people who are paid to be organizers and to be in the street 24/7. And then there are folks who have children, they have jobs, they have commitments, they have sick parents or school. And so that sustained resistance becomes more of a challenge. And I think, though, that it becomes more probable that people can be engaged when they know what they are pushing for. And so that's always, I keep coming back to that because I do think that's part of it. Like the civil rights movement, there was a goal.
Agree with what you're saying, but to take what you're saying and move with it a little bit as well is, the general strike idea. The reason why the unions are involved is because they are involved with strikes, and the most basic fundamental union strike idea is that these unions, if they're run properly, according to the field guide for strikes, you need to have a strike fund so that people can get access to funds if they're not working. I know that was a light bulb moment for me personally. I was like, oh, I get why the unions are so powerful. They're there to support each other. It's kind of an ingrained idea of like, how do we support each other so that we can all rise up together? And the general strike, I think a lot of people think, oh, I've got to go on the street for 3 weeks. And that's just not the case. Like a general strike can look like people on the street for 3 weeks, sure. And that would be great in my mind because I'm a photographer. So. But but the other thing is that it's about that idea of like, okay, how can I help? I can't be on the street today, but my brother can be, or my sister can be, or my friend can be, or I can't be on the street at all because I'm taking care of a sick mom or dad. And how can I contribute to this? And it might be financial, it might be, oh, you know what, you want to go on protest? I can watch your kids, or my kids are being watched by a friend. They'll take on another couple kids, because we want to make sure that you can participate in this. And that's what it looks like. That's what this looks like. It looks like it's like one helping hand to the other. It's like a human chain. And how do we create that human chain so that like no one's left behind?
The success of the civil rights movement, the Alabama bus boycotts, came from organization, communities being willing to stand together and to fill in the gaps, people who weren't part of the community finding alignment with the cause and also offering their service and their resources. But everyone fighting and moving, I keep saying this, I'm like a broken record, moving towards a goal. And in that goal setting, there is an opportunity for folks to say, we see the vision, we see the purpose, we see the way. And I do think right now, another thing that's possibly causing some is this exhaustion is the fact there's so much being thrown out at people all at once. The Trump administration is just bombarding communities with so many things to react to that it's exhausting, it's overwhelming, and it's frustrating. I call it chaos politics. He's a chaos agent. That's what he does, and he has people who are a part of that. And I think that's when the alignment and the connection to community becomes a way in which you can sustain the effort for change, because
Mhm,
that's where you find the solace and the opportunity to organize strategically around the things you will respond to, how you'll respond to it, how many people will go out, how many people won't go out, so that we are not exhausted by the inundation, the deluge of attacks, but that we can organize and make the best possible strategic plans to address and to fight the things that we know that are unjust and oppressive. Hey, if you had any advice for how people can get engaged in community, that they can wrap themselves around and they can be wrapped around in as well, what would that be?
Well, first off, I wanna say this is one of the most difficult questions to answer, so it's a battle it's a personal battle I have that I'm never doing enough, and so I say this with all sincerity and humility that it's very, very difficult. So I respect those that echo that feeling. It's difficult, because it's constantly, challenging yourself, and, I feel like personally, if I don't cover everything that's in New York, then I'm a failure. It's impossible. Live in New York City, but even if I lived in Duluth, it would be difficult. My answer to your question is actually start hyper local, because that's where you can actually make a huge you can make a huge difference in a very uh, concentrated way. Though it's not organized in this particular way, I have friends at a community garden that I go and visit once a week or more. And it's fun to go to the garden and do some gardening and also talk about what's going on and what events are coming up, what what protests are coming up, what issues are affecting people, what do we think about these issues, what do we think about these candidates. It's all about engagement. So like, there's just a few people. The garden is not political. It's not the garden's position. It's just that I happen to know these people, and they happen to go to this garden, and I do. But it can be as simple as that. It can That's how easy it is at your neighbor at the dog run. I mean, I know that sounds really strange, but you can make like almost anything can become that source of community. It's really just about how you want to frame it once you get there, you know? So if you find some people that you were able to talk to, great. Now, in terms of actual organizations, if that's what you mean, of what to, some suggested types of organizations to go for. Well, what are your interests? I mean, if you're interested in the environment, there's, environmental groups that are really great. Sunrise Movement, Extinction Rebellion, uh, Fridays for Future. These are three. Greenpeace. These are These are obvious, but they all have usually have some form of local chapters. And if you're interested in them, they'd love to pop for climate. Or they'd love to have you. So those are, but that's where are your interests? If it's more about if it's not about environment, and it's about public policy, then maybe you want to join like some type of political club. There are political clubs you can join. But I think the most important um, people that are unsung heroes in this are mutual aid groups, and that means like feeding people, trying to get help people that are unhoused. If you're a cook, you can or a chef, you can donate your time at kitchens, and it makes a huge difference. And you can meet people that and talk about what's important to you and see where they stand on it. Community comes in all forms and facets. It could be a movie, a filmmaking group. It could be a documentary club. All these things are possible. I'm lucky to be involved in the photo and photography, so there are lots of photographers that I've been lucky to document beside at some of these events, and some of them and I have become friendly. And so we can talk about photography, and we can also talk about, well, what does this mean to us as when we divorce ourselves from the documentary side and take on what are our own personal politics hats, and we put them on, where does that leave us? I think there's a lot of opportunity out there. It's just getting over that hump. There are big groups like I've been involved with in the past, like Indivisible, which I have misgivings about many big groups. Move On, I have misgivings about, all the way down to Human Rights Watch. I have big misgivings about, because some of their politics are not good politics. Not speaking up about Palestine for Human Rights Watch, it's like a incredibly huge thing. There are lots of really interesting and I think really valuable groups to be a part of. So it's taking that step and getting past that threshold of the invisible door, because it's there. It's just about, are you going to walk through the door or not?
If people took time, like they do, to assemble a Spotify playlist, it takes some time to do that. You can take some time to search through organizations, local community organizations who are doing really good work that's making your community better or trying to make your community better. So I do agree with you that it's a matter of just finding your interest and seeing where you can roll up your sleeves and get engaged. I said this on the previous, on my last episode, and I'll say it again. Democracy is not a spectator sport. It's not about a political side. It's really about being engaged and working towards having access around the freedoms that we say that we want to have in governance. And so the more people engage in it, besides voting, the greater opportunities we have to have our democracy represent what we actually need and want. And I think that June 14th is a great opportunity for people to step up and step in. And I hope that people will step up, step in, and step out and do more to engage with the broader issues that everyone is facing. Immigration raids are one thing, Medicaid's another thing, gender rights is another thing, but all of these things collectively are about the democratic values that we say that we hold dear to ourselves, that we're all created equal. And I think that if anything, that should be the aligning principle people stand up and step in and move out into the world with. I want to thank you for spending some time with me today.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. Let's maybe we'll have to do it again.
I hope so. We'll have to follow up after the 14th, but before 2028.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, yeah, thanks for having me, and yeah, appreciate you.
This episode of Let's Talk Democracy was planned specifically because of the planned protests, No Kings, on June 14th in the US. However, the anti-ICE protests in Los Angeles over the weekend have now become the focus because of the escalation by Donald Trump. escalating the situation on the ground, sending the California National Guard, and now 700 Marines are on their way to be deployed. This conversation today is more relevant than ever. I think it's really important to remember that during this period of time where official narratives often obscure the truth, photojournalism or eyewitness accounts can serve as a counterbalance, visual and narratively. That we can preserve the people's stories in frames, but we can also reserve the people's stories and our presence and documenting it with memory that cannot easily be erased. Photojournalism is an incredible witness to the world, and that witness to the world is the image of us, engaged in resistance. And when democracy is under threat, the role of being present becomes even more urgent. With mass movements rising around the globe, the protest marches against the raids on undocumented immigrants in LA, and a countrywide protest planned for June 14th, the stories we will tell through images are more than just documentation. Just like our presence is more than just showing up. These are all part of the fight. As we stand together, we become a force for democracy itself. If you want to join a protest, check out the link in the description of this episode. And if you have comments, questions, or feedback for me, as usual, please send me an email to tina@patternchangelab.com. Join me next week when I'm in conversation with Kathy Bookvar. I'll talk to you then.